Hey everyone, welcome back to my channel. I hope you're all doing super well. Thank you all so much for being here. Today's case has actually been highly requested, and it's a case that happened in the 80s, but it's one that's never stopped being in the media because of how shocking and upsetting it was. In fact, I feel like this case has even more eyes on it now since Netflix just came out with a show called Monsters, which is loosely based on what happened to the Menendez brothers. Now, I am going to talk about Monsters towards the end of the video because there has been a lot of controversy surrounding the show, which I feel like is totally understandable. I only watched a couple of episodes from the show, but even just with those few episodes, I was like, okay, I feel like that didn't actually happen in real life. It's definitely, dramatized and just kind of exaggerated for the purpose of being a TV show. So if you guys do watch it, just take it with a grain of salt. I did see that the creator of the show, Ryan Murphy, was like, oh, it's because I just wanted to represent like different perspectives, like from the dad's point of view and the moms and the brothers and stuff like that. So that's why the show is a little bit all over the place. But I was like, you know what? I need to do a deep dive into this and just do my own research because it is just shocking. The majority of the information for today's video came from the trial, from testimony given by the brothers, interviews with family members, with friends. I mean, there's just so much information to go through, and if you guys want to dive deeper into it, I will include some sources down below that you guys can read after the video. Trigger warning, we are going to be talking about sexual abuse involving minors, and again, just my thoughts while doing the research for this was just like, wow, like can these brothers catch a break? I mean, they were abused their entire lives and then were used by so many people after the fact. As I said, there is a lot of information to go through, but before we get into the video, I do just want to take a quick moment to thank today's sponsor, NoCD. One of the most common questions I get asked is if talking about true crime so often affects my mental health or leaves me feeling unsettled. The truth is, it does. It can be really difficult to dive deep into these terrifying and disturbing cases, especially ones that involve a seemingly normal person committing the most brutal crime you've ever heard of. It makes you question people. I mean, how does a normal, everyday person do something so haunting? Could I ever be capable of doing something terrible? Honestly, intrusive thoughts are just more common than you think. In fact, almost everyone has them. But for people with obsessive compulsive disorder or OCD, they tend to feel sticky and it can cause a lot of distress. OCD latches onto these thoughts and can make you feel like a monster, even though that isn't true. But that's what makes OCD so debilitating. The thoughts can feel so real that seeking help can seem like a huge risk. So instead, people will try to get rid of their distress by doing certain mental or physical actions, despite the fact that it never seems to work in the long run. I know how hard it is to feel this alone and frustrated, and what a difference it can make to have the right kind of care and support. That's why I want to introduce you to NoCD. NoCD is a virtual therapy provider for OCD with licensed therapists who specialize in OCD, so they understand intrusive thoughts. It was created by people with OCD, and every NoCD therapist is trained in exposure and response prevention, or ERP. It's a type of therapy that was specifically designed for OCD, and it's considered the gold standard treatment. NoCD also accepts any major insurance plans and offers always-on support between sessions, so you're never alone. To learn more about therapy with NoCD, go to nocd.com and schedule a free 15-minute call with their team. That's nocd.com to learn more and book a free 15-minute call. Thank you to NoCD for sponsoring today's video, and with that, let's jump right in. We're going to go back in time and kind of go through how the Menendez family came to be. Let's start off with Jose Menendez, the father. He was born on May 6, 1944 in Havana, Cuba, and he grew up with his parents and with his two sisters, Marta and Teresita. Jose's father was a pretty well-known soccer player who also owned his own accounting firm. His mother was a swimmer who went on to be in Cuba's Sports Hall of Fame, and because of this, Jose was also really athletic himself. It was just kind of like a family thing. Growing up, he was closest to his mother, who kind of instilled in him the importance of having that like macho, like machista male image, and this led Jose to grow up and kind of be considered a bit of a bully and like troublemaker by his neighbors and his peers. I mean, everyone says that he just had like a very intense attitude, that he was always just like a very uptight and serious person. When Jose was 15, 16 years old, he was sent by his family to make a life for himself in the United States, and he moved to a cousin's house in Pennsylvania and started attending high school. He didn't speak English that well, but he quickly started to learn. He kept his grades up, and he ended up getting a swimming scholarship to Southern Illinois University. In 1962, while he was attending school there, he met Kitty Anderson. Now, Mary Louise Anderson, nicknamed Kitty to all of her friends, was born on October 14th, 1941 in Oak Lawn, Illinois, a suburb of Chicago, to her parents Charles and May Anderson. She grew up with three older siblings, Brian, Milton, and Joan. Her father owned an air conditioning business while her mother stayed at home. home. Kitty's childhood was pretty tough. Her father was physically abusive to her mother as well as to Kitty's brothers, which was something Kitty witnessed regularly. Then, while Kitty was still a child, her father actually left the family to go be with his mistress. This caused Kitty's mom to be so depressed, like she was in bed pretty much all the time. At this time, divorce was also like really looked down upon, so it just caused her family to kind of be like ostracized. So Kitty wasn't a very happy child. Everyone says she was very beautiful, so she had dreams of making it as an actress and possibly modeling. In fact, while she was in high school and in college, she actually competed in a couple of beauty pageants. While she was attending Southern Illinois University for communications, she won the beauty pageant title of Miss Oak Lawn. She met Jose in a debate class when she was a senior, and the two quickly started dating. After that, they were like always together. Jose wanted to transfer to Queens College to get an accounting degree, but he wanted Kitty to come with him to New York, so he proposed. Now, both of their parents were not happy with this idea. I mean, neither of them wanted them to get married. Jose's parents were like, you're 19 years old, like you're not getting married. And they also just didn't like the fact that Kitty's parents were divorced and that she was a little bit older than him. As for Kitty's family, I mean, they were also not too happy about this proposal. They opposed the marriage, and a lot of people feel that they opposed the marriage because Jose was Cuban. But Jose and Kitty didn't care. They didn't care about what their parents were thinking. They were in love, and in 1963, they got married and moved to New York City. Kitty was working as a school teacher, and Jose worked as a dishwasher while he finished his degree. After Jose graduated, he got a job working as an accountant for Coopers and Limbrand, and then he became the manager for commercial leasing for Hertz rental cars. RCA, which is short for Radio Corporation America, actually acquired Hertz in 1967, so Jose then transitioned his role to RCA Records, becoming an executive and making a lot of money. Now, not wanting to raise the kids in the city, Jose and Kitty decided to move into a home in Princeton, New Jersey, where their first son, Joseph Lyle Menendez, was born on January 10th, 1968. Kitty quit teaching to be a stay-at-home mother, and then she gave birth to their second son, Erik Menendez, on November 27th, 1970. Taking after their family's athletic side, both Lyle and Erik grew up swimming, they played tennis, they played soccer. I mean, they were just like really athletic, and it seems like they both just really excelled at tennis. They were actually in the top rank for their age division. I mean, they were like really good at tennis, but everyone says that they were still humble about this. According to their tennis coach, Charles, the brothers weren't going around bragging about how good they were at tennis or anything like that. The one thing Charles did notice, however, was that their father Jose was like very involved in their training and was like obsessive over their performance. Charles stated that Jose was just way too hard on the boys. Like he put way too much pressure on them. He pushed them way too far, and the boys just always felt so like anxious and just sad about it. Instead of going to their games feeling happy and excited to play tennis, a sport that they love, the boys would show up to their games just feeling anxious and just under pressure, and it wasn't a joyful thing. Erik says that he felt like he had to live up to his dad's expectations, but that they were unrealistic. Charles just like couldn't stand by and watch Jose treat his kids that way, so he actually spoke up and told Jose like, hey, I'm the coach, you're the dad, and that's how it should be. Like, you need to step aside and let me as a coach do my job. Jose didn't like this. He told Charles that he was naive, and then he fired him. Charles was so upset about this. I mean, he had been Erik and Lyle's coach for the past 5 years. He was extremely close to the brothers. He cared for them so much. He felt like he was all that the brothers had, like their dad wasn't a loving person. He wasn't a caring or thoughtful person. He was just like ruthless and just strict and just really, really obsessive. So Charles was like, I just felt like I was like their comfort in their life. So now not being able to see them and being fired, I mean, it just affected him a lot. Charles knew that the only reason he got fired is because he finally stood up to Jose, and Jose just couldn't handle it. Anyways, outside of tennis, the boys attended the private school Princeton Day School, and they were really close with each other. Erik was considered the more shy and sensitive of the two, but it was clear that both boys just really wanted to please their father. This could cause Erik to be a little bit more anxious because he had a harder time living up to his father's standards, while, it seemed like Lyle was his father's favorite. Erik also got more of like the artistic gene from his mother's side, and he really enjoyed acting. He stated that he wished to attend UCLA for acting, and he was even in a play in high school. In 1980, at just 36 years old, Jose became the head of RCA's record division, and he signed really big groups such as Duran Duran and the boy band Menudo, which Ricky Martin was a member of. And at this job, Jose didn't have a problem doing what it took to get ahead. He was said to have like a really tight rein on everything and was described described by all of his coworkers as being an aggressive businessman. I mean, people were kind of scared of Jose, like he was a really intense guy. In terms of Jose and Kitty's relationship, Jose wasn't a great partner either. In fact, he was terrible. He was actually having an affair and his wife Kitty knew about this. This, of course, like broke her heart, but she stayed with him. An employee at Jose's work said that Kitty was just like really dependent on Jose, that she would call him at work every 30 minutes, like she just like really needed him. A business associate of Jose said, quote, "They used to say about Kitty that she was Jose wearing a wig. She was always very much at his side, part of his vision, dedicated to the cause, whatever the cause was." Kitty's sister, Joan, actually testified about this, affair and about Jose cheating and all of that, and said that one day Jose came back from a big meeting with like other executives and like other bosses and things like that, and that he came back feeling really bad about himself. Kitty asked him, "What's wrong? Why do you feel so low about yourself?" And he was like, "Well, I just feel weird because all the other executives have affairs and they have girlfriends and they have multiple partners, and I'm the only one that doesn't have a mistress. I'm the only one that's not having an affair." And Kitty was just like shocked by this. Like, what a weird thing to feel like low about. And then from there, Jose started having an affair with this woman who he basically had an affair with for 8 years. So he wasn't a good partner. And Kitty had also developed a reputation for being someone who had a history of drinking and taking pills. So in 1986, Jose was hired by the independent film company Carolco Pictures to be the chief executive and chairman of the home video division. So the family packed up all their things and they moved across the country to Calabasas, California. There, Jose brought the same intensity that he had at RCA. He helped the company get out of debt and he turned it around mainly by cutting almost 400 jobs. So Jose was getting paid well. I believe at one point his salary was like $500,000. And just like imagine that salary back then, like in the 80s, that's just crazy. In Calabasas, they actually rented a home while they were building their dream home on 13 acres of land. But instead of moving into this dream home that they were building, in 1988, the family actually moved into a $4 million mansion in Beverly Hills that had been previously owned by Elton John and by Prince. This house was just like insane. Like it's absolutely gorgeous. It's a dream home. It had 6 bedrooms, a beautiful backyard, a pool. Like it was stunning. The family settled well in Beverly Hills, but you might be wondering, like, why did they leave Calabasas if they were building their dream home? Well, in July of 1988, while they were still living in Calabasas, Erik, Lyle, and one of Erik's friends broke into their other friend's parents' house and they actually stole a safe, cash, and other valuables. Erik and Lyle decided to do it to another friend's parents' house, but they didn't invite the original friend from the first burglary, and I guess the friend either got like jealous or like something because he turned the brothers in. So Erik and Lyle got arrested and it turns out that they had stolen an estimated $100,000, which is actually enough to be classified as a felony offense. Jose didn't want his sons to spend any time in jail, so he actually hired a criminal defense attorney to represent them, and that attorney was able to like work out an agreement with the district attorney's office, and in the end they decided that Erik would take all of the blame for this, that he would be like, "Nope, it was just me, I did it, I plead guilty." And the reason that they decided Erik should do this is because he was still a minor and Lyle wasn't. Erik would go on probation, do some community service, and he also had to have court-mandated psychological counseling. I mean, all of that seemed better than going to prison. Jose wrote both families a check for $11,000, and it seems likely that these burglaries in Calabasas are what caused the family to move to Beverly Hills to have a fresh start. So now in Beverly Hills, Lyle and Erik formed a new group of friends. Erik attended Beverly Hills High School, Jose was focused on work, and Kitty was focused on the home. After finishing high school, Lyle, the older brother, attended a year of community college before enrolling at Princeton University. He moved to campus, he joined their varsity tennis team, and he started an entire new life at Princeton, all while Erik was still back at home. So, now that brings us to 1989. Lyle was actually having some issues keeping up at Princeton. He was caught plagiarizing and he was giving a 1-year suspension. With that, he packed up his belongings, he moved back to California and moved back to his parents' home. As for Erik, the year that Lyle moved back, he was doing okay. He was still a senior at Beverly Hills High School and he was actually ranked number 1 in tennis for his school and number 44 in the US as a junior, which, I mean, wow, like that's that's a huge accomplishment. In the spring of that year, he graduated high school and he had plans to attend UCLA in the fall. However, none of that would end up happening because on the night of August 20th, 1989, everything changed. That night at 11:47 p.m., Lyle called 911 hysterically crying. He said, "Someone shot my parents and that they were dead." Beverly Hills police immediately rushed over to the mansion and they found 47-year-old Kitty and 45-year-old Jose dead in their den, shot multiple times. The weapon used was clearly a 12-gauge shotgun, but the bullet shell casings had all been collected before the police arrived. Jose had been shot 6 times, with the fatal shot being to the back of his head. Kitty had been shot a total of 10 times, with the fatal shot being to her cheek, leaving her face unrecognizable. Kitty was also found on the ground, making it clear that she had been trying to crawl away during the attack, but was shot there. Erik and Lyle were taken to be interviewed and they told police that they had been at a 10 p.m. showing of Batman in theaters, that they left out the back, and that they were stopping by the house to grab Erik's fake ID before going out to a restaurant to meet a friend, and that when they walked in the house, that's when they discovered their parents' bodies. The police didn't ask them any follow-up questions and they actually cut Erik's interview short because he was crying so much. Police definitely also didn't check their hands for shotgun residue and they didn't even try to corroborate their alibi. They were just like, okay, yeah, that makes sense, and they moved on. Erik and Lyle weren't considered suspects at all, and police started looking into the mafia angle, thinking that this could possibly have something to do with Jose's business dealings or a possible business rivalry. The company Jose worked for also had a $15 million life insurance policy out on him and on like other executives, but apparently that's like a pretty common practice with executives at high-earning companies. So the investigation started, and the first thing police noticed was that there were no signs of forced entry in the home and no bloody footprints anywhere. However, Kitty's jewelry had been taken and drawers in the home had been like rifled through, so they were like, okay, maybe this was like a robbery. Some of the neighbors had heard what they thought at the time were firework explosions, but none of the neighbors saw anything. Police just continued working through this and they ended up following up with the mafia theory. I mean, Erik and Lyle were like, I really think that's what happened. Like, I think my dad was targeted by the mafia and my mom was just like collateral damage. So they started looking into this, and Jose and some business partners had purchased Strawberry Records chain, which was a store franchise that was previously 25% owned by one of the top crime families in New York. Noel Bloom, who previously owned the company, was questioned, and he apparently did have ties to a crime family, but I mean, all of that wasn't really getting police anywhere. Again, Lyle and Erik were really pushing this theory, so police continued to look into it, but there just wasn't any proof that the mafia did this. After moving away from the mafia theory, police moved over to the brothers. I mean, looking into the victims' families is just kind of typical police procedure, and Erik did have a record for burglaries in Calabasas. Now, just because someone committed a burglary doesn't mean that they were capable of committing a brutal murder. However, that narrative changed when Erik's friend, Craig, came forward to police and said that just 12 days after the murders, he and Erik were playing chess when all of a sudden Erik said, "Do you want to know what happened?" Craig said, "Yes." And Erik then revealed that he and his brother Lyle did it, that they killed their parents. Craig was waiting for Erik to say, "Ha, gotcha, I'm just kidding," but that never came. This was just shocking to Craig, and it truly frightened him because the two had actually written a screenplay together called Friends. Now, this story was about a son who murders his parents to receive $1 million inheritance, so it was just really eerie to hear this. I mean, imagine writing a play with your best friend about a son who murders their parents, and then that friend tells you that he did that in real life. It was just really shocking, and all of this is just hearsay. Nothing Craig shared with the police actually proved that the brothers did it, so police still had nothing solid to go off of in terms of an arrest. They knew that they had to come up with some type of plan to get Erik's confession on tape, and this is when they got the idea to have Craig wear a wire and secretly record Erik. Craig agreed to this plan. He put the wire on and met Erik for lunch, hoping Erik would easily confess to the murders and that this would all be over with. Craig tried to prompt Erik to tell him what happened that night, but Erik wasn't budging. He told Craig that he just made the entire thing up and that he didn't actually kill his parents. With this, the police once again were back to nothing. Months went by with no leads until March 5th, 1990. This is when police got an unexpected tip. A woman named Judalon Smith came into the police station claiming to be the very recent ex-mistress of Dr. Jerome Oziel, who was Erik's psychologist from the burglaries. Because remember, one of the conditions for him pleading guilty and doing all of that was that he had to go to a psychologist. Well, That was Dr. Oziel. Judalon, the mistress, told police that the family found Dr. Oziel through Kitty's psychologist and that for his sessions, the whole family actually showed up, even though it was just supposed to be private for Erik. And these therapy sessions weren't like normal therapy sessions because apparently Erik didn't even complete his hours ordered by the court because Jose basically just paid Dr. Oziel to sign off that Erik had completed the sessions, but he didn't even go to all of them. Right after the murders, Dr. Oziel contacted the boys and offered them help to get through this difficult time. I mean, he was really trying to insert himself into the boys' lives during this time. He even went to the parents' memorial service and he actually billed the boys for his attendance. He was also trying to give the boys advice on what attorneys to hire for the will and things like that. So, I mean, his mistress Judalon said that Dr. Oziel's personality was very controlling and domineering, so for her it just made sense as to why he was trying to insert himself so much after the murders. So Judalon tells police all of this background information, and then she says that on October 31st, Erik called Dr. Oziel and asked to speak with him in person. Erik showed up to the therapist's office and asked to go on a walk. During this walk, Erik revealed to Dr. Oziel that he and Lyle murdered their parents. After this, they returned to the office to talk some more about this, but before that, Dr. Oziel called Judalon and told her to immediately come to the office to pretend to be a patient and to listen in on everything. I mean, Dr. Oziel was scared that something bad could happen to him. He couldn't tell police what Erik just confessed to because it would be a violation of patient-therapist confidentiality. So he didn't want to call the police, but he called his mistress and he still broke that violation either way. Now, the way that this office is set up is like a little bit weird. Apparently, you're able to hear the sessions from the waiting room, which is like really crazy for a therapy office, but normally the appointments were like staggered so that no one was able to overhear your conversations. Anyways, Erik and Dr. Oziel continue speaking in the room, and Erik just reveals everything. He reveals how he and Lyle did this, how it happened, where they put the weapons, everything. Now, we'll get into what actually happened the night of the murders a little bit later in the video, and as to the real reason why they did this. After hearing this confession, Dr. Oziel told Erik that he needed to call his brother Lyle, that he needed to tell him that he confessed to everything, and that he needed to come to the office right away, which Lyle did. As for Judalon, I mean, she listened to Dr. Oziel's instructions, and she was literally outside in the waiting room while the brothers were inside the room speaking. She said that Lyle became furious when he found out that Erik had confessed to Dr. Oziel and that he even threatened to kill him. The brothers eventually left the therapist's office, and then on November 2nd, Dr. Oziel had them come back into the office and he told the brothers that everything from the last session was taped, that he had copies of the tape in a special safe deposit box and at a lawyer's office, and that they would be played if something bad happened to him. But that was a lie. He actually didn't record anything from that first session. I mean, he was just saying that to like protect himself because again, he was scared that the brothers were going to kill him. However, he did eventually start recording notes from their appointments just weeks later, but these tapes were basically just him like talking on the tape and like repeating what they had told him. Now, of course, Erik and Lyle had no idea that he was lying about this. I mean, they believed him. They believed that he did have a copy of their confession. I mean, they really had no reason to think that he would lie about this. So yeah, Dr. Oziel then convinced the brothers that he was their ally and that he would be their only ally if they were arrested. Then he proceeded to literally extort them for money and told them that they needed to pay him for weekly sessions, even if they didn't come, so that it would look good on paper just in case they ever did go to trial. But really, this doctor's only goal was to get money from them and to get their confession on tape, which he did eventually get on December 11th. Now, it's been speculated that the only reason he wanted to get this confession on tape was that so he could continue to extort the brothers for money because, I mean, there's really no other reason why he would need it. You know, according to Judalon, he had found out directly after that October 31st session that he was technically allowed to report Lyle and Erik because Lyle had threatened him, so legally he was allowed to come forward and break the confidentiality, but he decided to not come forward and tell police because, I mean, people believed that he just wanted more money and just wanted to extort them more. Dr. Oziel had also told Judalon in a very threatening manner to not tell anyone about the brothers' confession. I mean, this was all just too much. Police were listening to Judalon say all of this, like, what the heck are you talking about? Like, wait, what? You're like someone's mistress and like, you know about this how? Like, none of it made sense, but Judalon continued with the confession and told the police that the two shotguns guns used to kill their parents were purchased at a sporting goods store in San Diego, California. It turns out that the brothers had used Lyle's friend's ID to purchase the guns, and after this huge reveal from Judalon, police got a warrant to search all of Dr. Oziel's offices, all of his residences, everything. And the tapes were eventually found in a safe deposit box in a bank on Ventura Boulevard. With this, on March 8th, 21-year-old Lyle was arrested while he was leaving his family's Beverly Hills home in his brother's Jeep. Yeah, he was pulling out of the driveway when police basically pulled him over and handcuffed him. As for 19-year-old Erik, he was away at a tennis tournament in Israel when he heard the news of his brother's arrest. Erik broke down crying, and he knew he had to get out of Israel before he was arrested there. Erik and his tennis coach flew to London, and then Erik flew to Miami and met up with his dad's side of the family. Erik did let the police know that he was going to be traveling to LA and that he was going to turn himself in. And then just 3 days after his brother was arrested, Erik was taken into police custody at LAX. Both brothers were booked on suspicion of murder and they were held without bond. They were arrested in 1990, but the trial didn't start for years because of the tapes. 5 months after their arrest, a judge ruled that the tapes were admissible, meaning that they could be used in the trial. The reason for this decision was that the judge said Dr. Oziel had reasonable cause to believe that Lyle and Erik were a threat to him. So since he was scared for his life, the court was allowed to break the patient-therapist confidentiality. However, 8 days later, Erik and Lyle's lawyers had the ruling reversed in the appeals court. The tapes were the prosecution's main piece of solid evidence, so they went back to court again to reverse the ruling. They actually took the case to a higher court, and then this back and forth went on for 2 years. 2 years of just like going back and forth about whether or not the tapes could be used in court. Finally, in August of 1992, the Supreme Court of California ruled that a, quote, portion of the material was deemed not privileged since the court concluded the communication between the psychologist and the brothers occurred during sessions not held for the purpose of therapy. So, the tapes were allowed. There were 4 tapes in total. One of the tapes was from December 11th, and that's the one that had Erik and Lyle on it. The others were just Dr. Oziel like repeating / giving his notes on the session. The tape that was made on October 31st, which just had Dr. Oziel on it, was allowed because that's when Lyle allegedly threatened him since he knew too much. Now, this threat that Lyle allegedly made was giving Dr. Oziel a handshake and saying good luck as he left the office. Dr. Oziel took the good luck as a threat. So because of that, because he was threatened with the good luck, the court allowed the tape to be used. The tape from December 11th, which was the one that recorded the confession, was actually not allowed to be used in evidence. With the tape situation finally being settled, Erik and Lyle were officially indicted for murder in December of 1992, which means that they were officially charged with the murders and would now be going to trial. I know, that was a lot. I mean, it's just so interesting how the one who broke the story was Erik's therapist's mistress. Right? That's just so insane. Now, before we dive into the trial, let's talk about how the brothers were doing behind bars because, they weren't doing well. Erik was really struggling with his mental health, so his lawyer, Leslie Abramson, stepped in and got him a psychiatrist named Dr. Vickery to help him get through this. And this is when Erik opened up and revealed some truly disturbing information. Erik said that he was being sexually abused by his father, Jose. This was just absolutely shocking news for Leslie and for just everybody. This is just something disturbing to hear that a father was abusing his own child. But now that they knew the truth as to why they did this, the lawyers could build a case and argue that they did this in self-defense. However, Lyle didn't want to testify. He just really struggled to talk about the abuse that he suffered also at the hands of his father, and he said, quote, I would much rather lose the murder trial than talk about our past and about what had happened. It actually wasn't until right before the trial began that he agreed to testify. So, let's get into the trial. There was going to be one trial, but 2 juries, one for Erik and one for Lyle. Because of this, they had different attorneys. Leslie Abramson represented Erik, and Jill Lansing represented Lyle. The trial began on July 20th, 1993, and 51 witnesses were called in defense of Erik and Lyle. These were a mix of relatives, friends, coaches, colleagues, classmates, and just a bunch of people, and all of them came on there saying that they had witnessed Jose and Kitty abused the brothers in some form. Their defense was trying to argue that this was manslaughter, which is a much shorter sentence. As for the prosecution, they called 26 of their own witnesses, and they were trying to prove that this was first-degree murder and the death penalty was also on the table. Now, the prosecution argued that the motive for the murders was the brothers' hatred for their parents and for money. Why did they believe that they were in it for the money? Well, in the months following the murders, the brothers had spent an estimated of $700,000. $15,000 was spent on 3 Rolex watches. Lyle had bought a Porsche for $60,000. He had spent about like $40,000 on clothes. Erik had bought a Jeep Wrangler. He dropped out of school and he hired a full-time tennis coach for $50,000 a year. He also like lost $40,000 in an investment. I mean, they were just spending money on anything. They also moved out of their Beverly Hills home and they ended up leasing 2 apartments next to each other in Marina del Rey. But the majority of the money spent was actually by Lyle, who bought a restaurant for $550,000 in Princeton. To a lot of people, this just seemed insane. I mean, everyone was like, what the heck? Like, your parents were just murdered and you're out buying a Rolex? Like, it doesn't really make sense. But Erik and Lyle had the full support of their family, who claimed that the brothers' spending habits didn't change after the murders. You know, their parents were wealthy, so they were used to spending that kind of money. Not to mention, all of these purchases were approved by their uncle Carlos, who was currently the executive of the estate. To a lot of people and to their family, money wasn't the motive. To add to this, their uncle Carlos testified that the spring before the murders, Jose had told him that he told his sons that they were disinherited and that they were taken out of the will. Then Jose's sister Marta, who was a financial planner, found out how much Jose was worth after his death, and she tried to talk to the brothers about this, but they were like, I mean, we don't really want to hear how much our dad was worth. Like, we know we're not even getting anything. Because again, Jose had told them that they were out of the will. But she ended up telling them anyways and was like, your father is worth $14 million. And she said that Erik was really surprised to hear this number and that he said he didn't even know his dad was worth that much. So their Aunt Marta testified during the trial about this information just to kind of add to their credibility and to just kind of prove like they weren't in it for the money because they didn't even know how much he was worth, and they were also told that they were out of the will. However, the judge ruled that this conversation was not admissible evidence because the judge thought that the boys should have assumed that they would be inheriting a lot of money because of the size of their house. The prosecution was also not buying the story that the brothers didn't think that they were in the will. In fact, they brought up the possibility of a new will that the brothers had destroyed after the murders. The original 1981 will, the one that gave everything to the brothers, was found in about a week, and everyone was like, oh, turns out you were in the will. But the family looked everywhere for this supposed new will since Carlos and Jose had that conversation, and since the brothers believed that there was a new will. Not only could they not find a new will, but they also couldn't find anyone who was a witness to this new will. Like, you know what I mean? You can't just like write a will and be like, okay, this is my will. Like, you have to have someone be there. You need to have a witness for this to be legally valid. So there was no new will to be destroyed, and the original 1981 will gave everything to the brothers. So it's likely that Jose just lied to the brothers and was like, oh no, you're disinherited and you're taking out of the will, as a way to kind of control them and as a way to kind of frighten them. Maybe he did take them out for a bit, but then put them back in. Honestly, who knows? But at the end of the day, Lyle and Erik were supposed to be given everything, but they thought that they weren't. Anyways, moving on from the will, Erik and Lyle's defense team admitted that yes, the brothers did kill their parents. I mean, there's no denying that, but they did so in self-defense. This came after a lifetime of physical, mental, and sexual abuse at the hands of both of their parents. The brothers were truly scared for their lives and felt that killing their parents was their only way to stay safe. Lyle was the first to testify, and he stated that his father began essaying him at the age of 6, but that it stopped when he was 8. The testimony was extremely difficult to hear. I mean, he was so emotional on the stand, and you just couldn't help but get emotional with him. It's truly disturbing what Lyle endured. So Lyle said that the sexual abuse stopped at 8 years old. However, even after turning 8, he continued to take showers with his dad and with his brother Erik. In fact, Jose and Lyle's showering together went on until he was 21 years old, which is just absolutely disturbing to hear. Lyle testified that the abuse first started with massages after tennis or just after any sports practice, that his dad would massage his muscles, but then he began to massage his private parts. I won't get into all the details because YouTube will definitely flag this video, but But I will link parts of Lyle's testimony down below if you guys want to go check it out later. But I'm just warning you, it's brutal to hear, so just be careful. The sexual abuse he went through at the hands of his father is just everyone's worst nightmare. I mean, these are things that you cannot even imagine a father doing to their child. When asked how he felt about this abuse, Lyle said that at first he went along with it because he wanted to please his dad so that his dad would love him. He did tell his mom as a child that his dad was touching him, and he asked his mom to make it stop. I mean, he saw his mom as a way to safety and as a way to end all of this pain, but unfortunately, Kitty didn't protect him. Instead, she told Lyle that he was exaggerating and that his dad needed to punish him when he was bad, which is just so disappointing to hear. I mean, he went to his mom for help and she didn't believe him. Lyle was also very honest in his testimony, and he even confessed that when Erik was 5 years old, he took him out to the woods and essayed him with a toothbrush. I mean, to me and to a lot of other people, this just shows how honest Lyle was being. I mean, to admit something like this to a jury, to your family, to the entire world, it's a lot. It's not something that you want to admit to doing, but I mean, he said it because he wanted to be vulnerable and he wanted to show like how just messed up his childhood was. Now, expert Dr. Conti later testified that Lyle abused his brother Erik because he was acting out his own trauma that he was enduring. It was incredibly difficult for Lyle to reveal this terrible thing that he had done, but he did it. He's apologized to his brother Erik. They've talked it out, and Erik understands why he did this. Lyle also testified that his father would show him and his brother graphic videos. His dad would also show him these books that said that warriors in the past would have sex before going into battle as a way of bonding, and said that this also applies to sports, which is when he would give him those disturbing massages. Now, it was also revealed during this testimony that Jose had taken some very disturbing photos of his children. There's one photo of Lyle waist down in the bathtub. Then there's a photo that was found in an envelope titled Erik's 6th birthday in Kitty's handwriting. And one of the photos is of a 6-year-old Erik wearing a robe that he's holding open, and he has an erection. The prosecution tried to argue that the brothers took these photos of each other, which literally makes no sense. Why would the brothers do that? And then also, why would Kitty and Jose keep these photos? Lyle also testified about physical abuse that he endured, including a time when he asked his father to not yell at him at a tennis match. And Jose got so mad that Lyle was speaking up to him that he took him to the car and he punched him in the face, causing his mouth to bleed, and even threatened to kill him if he ever embarrassed him again. There was also psychological abuse, including a time when Lyle brought home his class rabbit. His mom told him to give the rabbit away, but after a few days, he didn't. One day though, the rabbit went missing. Lyle asked his dad where the rabbit was, and his dad was like, "Oh, it's in the garbage." Lyle ran over to the garbage, and inside, he found the rabbit beaten to death. What a horrifying thing to see. I mean, as a little child, that's just so traumatizing. And Jose wanted Lyle to find this. He wanted his son to hurt and his son to feel threatened and to be disturbed. As I mentioned, there was a lot more that Lyle revealed during his testimony about his dad. It was incredibly difficult to listen to, but now let's move over to what he had to say about his mother, Kitty. Kitty was also just a disappointment. Lyle testified that she would tell him all the time that she didn't even want him or his brother, and that they ruined her life. He actually began crying while talking about this in court and said that his mom began telling him this when he was just 7 years old. It turns out that Kitty never really wanted kids, and when she got pregnant, Jose kind of just forced her to be a stay-at-home mom. Remember, she had dreams of being an actress and modeling, and she used to be in beauty pageants and all of this stuff, and now, in her eyes, she was just a boring housewife. So she resented her kids. She would tell Lyle that she hated him, that he ruined everything, that he made her miserable. I mean, she even went as far as to say that the boys took Jose away from her. It's disgusting. Not only did she say these terrible things to Lyle, but from the ages 11 to 13, Kitty also sexually molested Lyle. Yeah, Lyle wasn't only being essayed by his dad, he was being essayed by his mother too. He testified that when he was 11, his mother would be topless or in an open robe, and she would ask him how she looked. abused. From 11 to 13, she would come in when Lyle was in a bath and she would wash him and wash his private areas with a sponge. Then, when he would be sleeping in bed with his mom, he would sometimes touch her, sometimes when his dad was in the bed too. When he was 13, he told his mom no to the abuse. I mean, he needed this to stop, but his mom was furious at this rejection and would harass him constantly. She would call him into the room when she was changing. She would pick him up from the club wearing only a robe. She would leave her underwear around the house for him to find. She'd even ask Lyle, like, "Do you think I'm pretty?" And then if he would say yes, she'd be like, "You're a liar." It's just insane. And then she would also touch his face like she was about to kiss him, and then she would go into a rage. She was also physically abusive. She had dragged Lyle to his room by his hair one time. She physically beat both of the brothers. It seems that Jose's affairs were like a huge factor in her behavior. After discovering one of his affairs, she wanted to end her life, and she actually left a note behind, which Erik found. Erik told Lyle about the note, and he went to confront his mom and told her to just divorce dad, to leave him behind, to leave this life behind, and that the three of them could pack everything up and move back to New Jersey and just have like a fresh start. They literally told their mom that they were on her side and that they chose her. But instead of listening to her kids and picking them, she instead told Lyle that he was the reason she was so unhappy, not Jose. There were just so many more cruel things that Kitty did to Lyle. I mean, just 5 days before the murders, Kitty literally ripped off Lyle's hairpiece in front of his brother Erik. Yeah, she just like ripped it off his scalp, and Erik was shocked by this. I mean, he had no idea that his brother's hair was fake and that he wore a hairpiece. It was just so disturbing to witness, and on top of that, it was extremely painful for Lyle, emotionally and physically. You're only supposed to take that hairpiece off with like a special remover, so he literally cried from how much it hurt. Now, why did Lyle have a hairpiece at such a young age? Well, his hair had been falling out and thinning since he was 14 years old, likely caused by the stress of all the long-term abuse that he was going through. Some people believe he may have even had alopecia, since that can be triggered by stress, and because now like he doesn't even have eyebrows, so people think that maybe he just has alopecia, but that hasn't been confirmed. So yeah, Lyle was losing his hair and he had to wear this hairpiece, which his mother then ripped off his head. Kitty was just so mean. She would also abuse his stuffed animals as a kid and would throw them out the window. Now, speaking of stuffed animals, Lyle had stuffed animals that he played with regularly up until the age of 17. He gave them all these personalities and he acted out different scenarios with the stuffed animals. He even took them to school with him, which teachers noted that he was teased for. Expert Dr. Conti later testified that Lyle was acting out play therapy and says that it's common for victims of abuse to keep stuffed animals, and testified he didn't think a non-victim would even know about this. Dr. Conti also even said an ex-girlfriend confirmed how important the stuffed animals were to Lyle, so Dr. Conti says that all of this just backs up Lyle's credibility. Something else that I think speaks to his credibility is when asked by his lawyer if his parents actually abused him and if he was a victim of this abuse, he said, "I don't think so. I've never used those words." "But weren't you a victim of sexual abuse?" "Well, with my father and my mother, I just described what happened to me. I think it was mutual," Lyle said. "But you were a minor, so it's sexual misconduct." "Yeah, I guess that's correct," Lyle replied. I mean, to a lot of people, this conversation showed how even years later, he was still being conditioned by all of the abuse that he can't even see his 6-year-old self as a victim and thinks that this was mutual. It's just really heartbreaking. At first, Lyle thought that only he was being abused by his dad and that his brother Erik was safe. However, at age 13, Lyle thought that he could hear his dad essaying Erik, so he confronted him about it, and Jose told him Erik was making things up, but he also assured Lyle that it would stop, and if Lyle didn't keep that just between them, he would kill him. So Jose is denying that this is happening, but then he is saying that it's going to stop and to keep it between them. It just doesn't make sense. Lyle then talked to Erik about this, and Erik implied that things were getting better, and that was the only conversation they had about it. That was until 5 days before the murders, when Erik admitted to Lyle that it was still happening, that he was still being essayed by his dad. The next day, Lyle and Erik had decided that Erik would be moving to get away from their dad. So Lyle, knowing that his mother didn't even want them around in the first place, went and told her that things were going to be changing around here. Kitty was confused, so Lyle explained that he found out things had been going on actually between Erik and Jose, and Kitty told him that Erik was lying, that he was dramatic, and that she wouldn't hear another word about it. So the next day, Jose came home from a business trip, and Lyle decided to confront him again. And he told Jose that he needed to stop it, that he needed to stop abusing his brother. And this is when Jose said, "I can do whatever I want with your brother." So Lyle threatened him and said that he would tell everyone if he didn't stop. And that's when Jose got very calm and said, "You're going to tell everyone anyway." After this, Lyle and Erik truly feared for their lives, and the next day the two brothers went out and they bought 2 shotguns in San Diego. Now, the reason they bought shotguns is because there's a 2-week waiting period for handguns, and there's no wait for shotguns, and they just didn't want to wait. They also had to use one of their friends, Donovan's ID, which Erik was using as a fake ID since he was under 21, because they had to use a California ID to purchase the guns, and their California IDs weren't valid at the moment. The prosecution argued, though, that they were using the fake ID to hide their purchase as part of their plan, but then the defense was like, I mean, why would they use the ID of one of their friends? Like, if they really wanted to hide their identity, they could have made like a fake ID with like a fake person, but they literally used their friend who could easily be tied back to them. So going back, the brothers bought the shotguns from a store in San Diego, and while they were driving to San Diego to pick up the weapons, this is when Lyle learned the details of Erik's abuse. Lyle didn't realize how horrific the abuse was, and this just made him realize Jose would be even more desperate to keep this a secret. The next day, the family was going on a shark hunting trip on the boat, and of course, the brothers didn't want to go on this hunting trip. The tension was extremely high between the brothers and their parents. I mean, they were scared Jose was going to do something to them to keep them quiet. Maybe he was planning on throwing them overboard. I mean, who knows? The brothers were just extremely scared. They were supposed to leave for the boat at about 11 o'clock in the morning, and the brothers purposely arrived late, hoping that their parents would be like, ugh, they're running late, let's just go without them. But no, when they got home, their parents were still there, waiting for them, ready to head out. The whole time while they were on the boat, Erik and Lyle kept their distance from their parents. I mean, they didn't want to go anywhere near them. There was a captain on the boat, so if something were to happen, like I guess that there would be a witness, but a lot of people wouldn't put it past Jose to pay off the captain and make him be quiet. So after the boating trip, the day of the murders came along, and Lyle, who was living in the guest house, went into the main house to kind of like test the waters and see if his dad was still planning on getting rid of them. Again, at this point, he truly feared for his life and was scared that his father was going to kill him any day. So he went into the main house and he asked his dad for a number of a camp that his dad wanted him to go to in Marina del Rey. But his dad said, what does it matter anymore? This frightened Lyle. I mean, to him, this meant that he wasn't going to be alive long enough to even go to this camp, that his dad was going to get rid of him soon. Later that day, Lyle had plans with his friend Perry, so he called Perry to check in, and Perry was like, oh, I called the house earlier, but your dad Jose told me you weren't home. Lyle was like, huh? Why would my dad say that? I wasn't home when I've been home the entire day. Not only did Jose tell Perry that Lyle wasn't home, but he also said that Lyle wouldn't be able to go out that night. Hearing this scared Lyle even more. I mean, he was thinking to himself, is my dad planning on killing me tonight? I mean, why else would he tell Perry that I wasn't home and that I couldn't go out? So the night continues, and the brothers tell their parents that they're going out. Kitty and Jose immediately put a stop to this. They were like, no, you're not allowed to go out. And Jose then told Erik to go up to his room. Now, this is just sick, but there was a family rule that you don't go into the room when Jose is in there with one of the boys, because he's in there abusing them, and that can't be interrupted. So when Jose told Erik to go to his room, this just grew the brothers' fear even more. Lyle told his dad, no, you're not going to touch my little brother again. I do what I want in my family. That's not your little brother. That's my son, Jose said. Kitty then chimed in and told Lyle that he ruined the family. Things were just growing more and more tense, and Jose grabbed Kitty and said, come on. And the two walked together to the family's den and closed the doors. This is when Erik and Lyle walked out to the car, loaded the shotguns, and then walked into the family's den and began firing at their parents, who were watching TV and eating. The brothers fired between 13 to 15 shots at their parents. His mom, like I mentioned earlier, was still alive, and she tried crawling away. Lyle and Erik walked back out to the cars to reload, and Lyle said that his eyes were filled with tears as he was reloading, reloading. And then he walked back into the family's house and shot his mom at close range. As for their father, Jose, he was standing and moving towards him when Lyle shot him. Now, the prosecutors tried to argue that Jose and Kitty were sleeping when the brothers shot them, but that theory totally ignores the fact that Jose had been shot in the left leg and that the shot went through his inner thigh and out the other end. So it would have been physically impossible for him to have gotten shot while sitting down. The blood on the couch also wasn't consistent with Jose being shot while sitting down. After the shooting, the brothers went and they sat on the stairs waiting for the police to arrive. They assumed that somebody must have heard the shots and called 911, but after waiting for a bit, they realized no one was coming. This is when they decided to try and cover up their tracks instead. So they picked up the shells knowing that their fingerprints were on them. They went to go try and buy movie tickets to the movie Batman as an alibi, but the movie tickets had a timestamp on them, so they knew that these weren't going to help, so they just ended up throwing them away. Then, contrary to what Judalon had told the police, the brothers took the guns that night to Mulholland Drive and they hid them there under some branches and like other things. Then they went to the gas station, they changed their clothes, they dumped their old clothes in the dumpsters, they dumped their shoes, and then they went to the Taste of LA at around 11:15 p.m. where they were originally supposed to meet their friend Perry at 10 p.m. Now, since they were running late, Lyle called Perry and was like, "Hey, sorry we're late. The festival is closed now. Why don't you go meet us at Cheesecake Factory in Beverly Hills?" Perry was like, "Okay, sounds good. I'll meet you at Cheesecake." But then Lyle called him back and was like, "Wait, never mind. Erik forgot his ID. We have to go back to the house. Why don't you meet us there instead?" Perry said no, that he would just wait for them to get the ID, and Lyle and Erik drove back to their family's home, and this is when Lyle called 911 and reported his parents' murders. Lyle testified that his emotions on the 911 call were genuine. Over the last few days, all of these emotions had been building up and they all just kind of came out on that phone call. So that was Lyle's testimony. There's so much more to his testimony that I wasn't able to include, but now let's move over to Erik's perspective and what happened to him before the murders. He testified that the abuse started at age 6 with massages and fondling. It then moved to Jose forcing him to perform oral on him at age 7. Not only that, but he would also insert objects into Erik. It's just disgusting. Erik says his dad was always nice to him during the abuse, but that then there was this one moment when he was 11 where things changed. Jose burst into Erik's room and pushed him off his bed and forced Erik to perform oral on him and then forced him to swallow his semen. Erik was crying and Jose yelled at him and was degrading him, saying like, "Why can't you be more like your brother?" and that he wasn't a true Menendez. After Jose left the room, Erik threw up. After the incident, Jose wasn't nice to Erik anymore during the abuse and didn't care if he was hurting him. When Erik was 12, Jose took a slat from under Erik's mattress and propped it up under the doorknob as a makeshift lock and then anally R-worded Erik for the first time. Erik was screaming and yelled in pain during the assault, begging his dad to stop. After Jose was done, he told Erik, "If you ever scream or yell again, I'm going to beat you so bad, you'll never be able to scream or yell again." It's just heartbreaking that Erik went through this, but if you can believe it, things got worse. At age 13, Jose would actually assault Erik and use needles, pins, tacks, and rope. He would stab the pins into Erik's butt. He would also put a towel down and cut Erik's thighs with a kitchen knife, and he actually still has one large scar from this. Erik attempted to run away at the age of 12, and when his father found him in a forest, he threw Erik against a tree and said, "If you ever run away again, I'll kill you, and you can never get away." At age 13, Erik heard from one of his friends at school that cinnamon makes semen taste better. So he started putting it in his dad's drinks and his food and his coffee. He also testified that he would use lemons as an attempt to get rid of the taste of semen. The excessive use of lemons was later corroborated by his aunt Marta, who was like, "Yeah, he used to eat lemons nonstop." Like I said, his testimony is incredibly difficult to listen to. He gets so emotional on the stand. He's crying, he's hyperventilating. It's just horrible. This abuse went on for years, and when Erik turned 17, he started building himself up so that he could finally say no to his dad and fight back. One night, his dad came into his room to essay him, but Erik said no. His dad tried to hit him. He threw him on the bed and then he stormed out of the room. However, He quickly came back into the room holding a large knife. He put the knife to Erik's throat and said, "I should kill you, and the next time I will." Erik was absolutely frightened by this, and he stopped fighting back, which then led to Jose R-wording Erik while making him watch this abuse through a mirror. And unfortunately, this wasn't the only abuse that involved a mirror. Once a week, Jose would make Erik stand in front of a mirror, either naked or in his tennis clothes, and would ask Erik questions such as, "Do you think you played well today?" If Erik said yes, Jose would say, "Wrong," and Erik had to hit himself in the head. If he didn't, or if he didn't do it hard enough, Jose would hit him. Other than the tennis questions, he would ask Erik, "What's going to happen if you tell anyone?" Erik said, "You'll hurt me," and Jose would say, "Wrong." Erik corrected himself and would say, "You'll kill me." "Right," Jose would say. Erik said the last time his father essayed him was in May of 1989, just a few months before the murders. So this was still going on while Erik was 18 years old. Erik testified that he thought the abuse was going to end because he was going to college. You know, he was going to UCLA and he wouldn't be living at home anymore. But 1 week before the murders, Jose told him that he wasn't allowed to move out. He said he could keep the dorm room that he had got, but that he couldn't use it, that he would have to live at home the majority of the week. So it's clear that Erik lost all hope after that. He was so emotional that he actually packed a bag with the plan of going to a friend's house for a few days just to breathe and kind of catch a break. As he was packing, his mom Kitty walked in and she looked at his bag, unpacked the bag, and said that he wasn't leaving. She then stormed out of the room and in came Jose. Jose pushed Erik against a window and said, "Are you planning on going somewhere?" Erik was absolutely frightened. I mean, he just kind of stood there frozen, and Jose said, "I'm gonna go out, but you better be here when I get back." This was just so horrifying, and unfortunately, Erik was very suicidal after this. He actually called Dr. Oziel and he made an appointment to come in, but then 2 days later, after the kitty ripping Lyle's hair piece off incident happened, is when Erik confided in his brother Lyle, saying that he was still being abused by his dad. This is when Lyle then told Erik that he was going to talk to Jose and that he was going to have him move in with him at Princeton to escape all of this. After that, Erik then canceled his appointment with Dr. Oziel. Then the night Lyle confronted Jose, which was just 3 days before the murders, Jose confronted Erik and said that Lyle wasn't going to tell the truth and that he wasn't going to let that happen. He then went to attack Erik, but Erik was able to run out of the room. He ran downstairs crying where he saw Kitty, and Kitty asked him, "What's wrong?" And Erik said that she wouldn't understand, and this is when Kitty revealed to Erik that she'd known all along about the abuse, saying, "I've always known. You think I'm stupid?" What? I mean, this just broke Erik's heart. I mean, his own mother knew that he was being abused the entire time, yet she did nothing to stop it. Erik ran back to the guest house with Kitty literally following him and told Lyle, "Mom knows." Lyle was like, "Wait, what?" And he even asked Kitty why she didn't save them. To this, Kitty replied, "No one ever helped me." After this, Kitty ran out of the guest house and Lyle tried to tell Erik that they needed to leave now, and Erik was like, "Well, where could we go that Jose wouldn't find us?" They realized that there was nowhere to go, no one to tell, no one to confide in, and I mean, they were like, "We can't tell the police, they're not going to do anything to help us." And then, as we know, just a few days after all of this, they killed their parents. Both brothers have said that they should have been arrested that night, the night of the murders. I mean, they still had gunshot residue on their hands. The guns were in the trunk of one of the cars parked in the garage. Police did search the house and a couple of the cars, but they didn't search that specific car. And if police had checked everything thoroughly, they would have found the guns right away and arrested the brothers on the spot. I know that this testimony was so incredibly difficult to listen to. I mean, it's disturbing what these boys had to go through their entire life. After the brothers' testimony, the judge went over the ruling of the California Supreme Court and allowed the brothers' confession tape from December 11th to be played as evidence, which is just crazy because, I mean, what a waste of 2 years arguing over it if in the end they were still going to use it. But the judge said that the brothers brought their mental state into the trial in their testimony, so that's why he felt it was reasonable to allow the tape. The prosecution also really wanted to use this tape. I mean, to them, this was proof that Erik and Lyle Lyle had confessed, this was also proof that they had made up all of the sexual abuse as a way to defend themselves and get less time. They honestly believed that there was never any abuse because if it was true, why wouldn't they have revealed that to Dr. Oziel during their confession? Well, the brothers' defense team was like, no, just because they didn't mention it on the tapes doesn't mean they weren't actually abused. On top of that, when Erik originally confessed to Dr. Oziel, Dr. Oziel was like, yes, I understand why this happened. I understand why you killed your parents. I mean, your dad was controlling and your mother was suicidal, so I get it. And because of that, Erik and Lyle just kind of went along with Dr. Oziel's perspective because they didn't want to reveal sexual abuse to him. Anyways, the tape transcript is online, so I'm just going to summarize it for you guys because it's pretty long. The brothers talked about the mom's suicide note that she had left after their dad's affair had been revealed, and how this really affected them as brothers and just made them grow a closer bond. Dr. Oziel asked them, well, when you ended up killing your mom, did you feel like you were sparing her? I mean, I know she was horribly depressed and she was totally dominated by your dad and she was like a shell of a person. She had no identity or strength anymore. Erik was like, well, I mean, we just knew our mom could never live without our father. Dr. Oziel had testified that the brothers said that they hated their parents. However, not once on the tape did they say that they hated their parents. In fact, just to quote one instance, Erik said on tape, quote, I love my father and I'll never love anyone like that, which I know might be hard to understand because why is he saying that he loves his mom and that he loves his dad when they did such evil things to him and to his brother? But to that, I just have to say that everyone deals with trauma in their own way. On the tape, Erik also mentions having dreams about killing himself and that in the dream, he was happy when he died, and when he woke up and realized that he was alive and that this was just a dream, he was upset. On the tapes, they even talk about how Jose had disinherited the boys from the will, and Dr. Oziel even recalls knowing about this because Kitty had told him. He said, quote, I was there. I remember when your mom called and told me that your dad was disinheriting you because he didn't really like how you were behaving and everything, and he thought you weren't being respectful. Again, this is just further proof that the brothers truly believed that they weren't going to inherit anything. As I mentioned, the transcripts are available online if you want to look more into it, but after the tapes were revealed in court, Dr. Ann Burgess, who is an expert witness, testified about the tapes, about the crime scene, and about the brothers. So, about the crime scene, Dr. Ann said that there was a clear lack of planning that went into the actual murders. Premeditated murders have an organized crime scene, and this scene in the den was clearly disorganized. 2 loud shotguns were used in the middle of summer when neighbors had their windows open and could probably hear the shots. There was also serious overkill, and Dr. Ann explained that the amount of shots fired indicated that they were driven by fear. She also testified that based on her expert opinion, she believed that the boys had truly been abused. Now, next on the stand was Erik's friend, Craig. Again, this is the friend who called the police and was like, listen, Erik confessed to me. He's a friend that they wrote the screenplay together about a son who murders their family. So yeah, Craig was called on the stand by the prosecution, and a lot of people have strong opinions on Craig. I mean, they don't feel that he was a good friend whatsoever and basically betrayed Erik. Craig testified that Erik never told him he was being abused by his parents and that he honestly didn't think he was telling the truth. Craig added that he was at the Menendez house just 10 days after the murders when they had hired a computer expert to try and wipe Kitty's computer to remove a potential new will, which again would not have the brothers in it. He said that after this, he stayed the night at their house and that Erik told him more about the murders. But his credibility was honestly completely shot when another friend named Casey took the stand. Casey was actually there when this computer expert at the house was hired, and then after that, Erik, Casey, and his mom and sister went out to dinner, and then Erik stayed over at their house until Casey left for college. And Casey's mom and his sister both testified confirming this. Casey also testified that he was no longer friends with Craig because he was a dishonest person. He also said that Craig told him that he was going to sell the rights to the Menendez family to his lawyer and that he was going to make millions off of this. Also, just because we're on the topic, let's talk about the computer expert situation. So it was argued that Lyle had deleted a file called Will off of Kitty's computer, which again was the new new will that allegedly Jose had made where Erik and Lyle were no longer getting an inheritance. So again, in the first week when the family was looking for the will, they of course checked her computer, they checked all the computers, and they saw the file. But there wasn't actually a will in this file, it was just a few words which a data expert testified to. It wasn't an actual document. And even if there was a will in this file, like I said before, there has to be a witness to a will. And regardless of that, a will on a computer is not a valid will in the state of California. So again, even if there was a new will saying that Erik and Lyle didn't get anything, I mean, it wouldn't have been able to be used. Lyle testified that the only reason he hired this expert is because Jose's cousin, who was known to be a little bit shady, had hired a computer expert to come to the house behind Lyle's back. Lyle was worried about his mother's private information and family secrets getting out, so he just hired the computer expert just to make sure that everything was all in order. Next, let's talk about Donovan, the friend whose ID the brothers used to buy the guns. He was a really close friend of Lyle's when he was at Princeton, and he testified that Lyle never told him Jose molested him. So he said that in court, and then later that same day, a man named Robert Rand, who was writing a book about the trial, went straight to the media and did an interview on TV saying that Donovan was a liar and that he perjured himself. It turns out that Robert had recorded an interview with Donovan in 1992, where Donovan told him that Lyle had told him that Jose was sexually abusing both of them. So why was Donovan lying on the stand? Why was he saying, oh, I didn't know he was being abused, yet he had done a recorded interview saying that he did know? Well, the next day back at court, Donovan continued to insist that Lyle didn't confide that secret to him. So Robert actually had to give the court the tapes, which was played as evidence and confirmed that Donovan was a liar, that he perjured himself, that he had been told by Lyle that he was being abused. So it's just really weird that Donovan lied about that when there was literally proof that he was lying. A lot of people like to bring up Craig and Donovan because they're I mean, these two friends just betrayed Erik and Lyle. Now, let's talk about Dr. Oziel, because he was really the prosecution's star witness in proving that this was first-degree murder, meaning that there was a plan and that this was supposed to happen. So in all of the recorded notes, he had said that Erik came to him on October 31st and told him about the plan to murder their parents. Well, their defense attorney, Leslie, did an amazing job at cross-examining him because she asked him, so what was the plan? Well, the plan was to brutally murder the father. And Leslie was like, okay, but what was the actual plan? He was like, well, the plan is what happened. And Leslie was like, I know what happened, but you're saying that Erik told you the plan was to always murder them in that den, because you said that Erik came to you and told you the whole plan, but you haven't explained what this original plan was or any other part of the plan other than that they wanted to kill the dad. And Oziel didn't really have an answer as to what other plans they had. Leslie also pointed out that Oziel testified the brothers called it the perfect murder, but nowhere in the notes or on the tape do the brothers ever refer to this as a perfect murder. So those are Dr. Oziel's words, not theirs. Oziel also just in general has very little credibility. I mean, his license was already on probation when he first met the Menendez family, and Judilon also sued him for assault and emotional abuse, and she won. I could honestly do a whole other video just on him and his crimes and everything that happened between him, Judilon, and other victims, but I'll just say this. He lost his medical license in 1997, and thank God for that. The prosecution tried to argue that the abuse was just an excuse because Erik, again, never told Dr. Oziel about any of it, but honestly, why would he? Oziel was never his real therapist, and Erik signed a confidentiality agreement when he started going to Oziel that Oziel could tell his parents anything Erik said. I mean, it was kind of hard to trust him when he knew that his dad Jose was talking to Dr. Oziel and being like, tell me everything my son is telling you. Also, the brothers have made it clear that they didn't trust Dr. Oziel, which again is obvious because he was blackmailing them. So why are you going to trust someone when they're literally blackmailing you? Wouldn't it be reasonable for them to assume Dr. Oziel would also try to extort them further if he knew the truth about their abuse? Now, let's go over some of the family members' testimony. I mean, at this point, everyone was wondering okay, so is anyone going to come on here and testify in defense of Kitty and Jose? Because at this point, so many people were coming forward saying how terrible Kitty and Jose were. Everyone was wondering, what do their own siblings and their family members think about the murders? Well, let's just say it was extremely difficult to find people to go on stand to say something good about Jose. Jose's brother-in-law, Peter Cano, who was married to Jose's sister, Marta, testified that when when Lyle was 5, he was like running around and just like playing, and that Jose stopped Lyle and said something in his ear. And whatever he said to Lyle caused him to wet himself. After this, Jose took Lyle into his room and Peter followed him, and there he witnessed Jose punching Lyle in the stomach with force. Peter thought that all of this was just unacceptable and he actually gave Jose a piece of his mind. Jose was like, "If you don't like this, then leave," and he did. Then his wife and Jose's sister, Marta, testified about Kitty saying, quote, "She told me she wished that they had never been born because they had broken her marriage." And again, Kitty had said this in front of Lyle. I mean, what a horrible, horrible thing to say. Peter and Marta's son, Andy, also testified that Erik confessed to him about the abuse. He said, quote, "He told me his father was massaging his dick and that it hurt. Erik told him that he could never reveal that to anybody." Then we have Alan Anderson, a cousin who lived with them when the boys were under 10 years old. He testified that he remembers the brothers had to shower with their father after tennis, which he thought was really odd because at this point the boys were old enough to shower by themselves, so why were they still doing it with their dad? At one point, he also saw Jose tell the boys in the bedroom, and then he would go in there with them, and Kitty wouldn't let Alan go near the room because again, that was one of the family's rules. Like if Jose is in a room with one of the boys or with both of them, no one is allowed to go in there and no one is allowed to interrupt them. Alan also witnessed the brothers being beaten with a belt to the point that it left visible bruises on them, and he testified that Kitty also had a temper just as bad as Jose. He witnessed her on multiple occasions taking glass plates and cups and smashing them in the sink. He also said that before the age of 6, Erik was a very outgoing and just happy child, but after age 6, he became introverted and scared of people. Next, let's talk about cousin Diane. She lived with the family for some time back in 1976, and one night, 8-year-old Lyle confessed to her saying that his dad Jose was essaying him. Diane told Kitty right away, but Kitty told her that Lyle was lying, which was just shocking to her. I mean, how do you not believe your own son? Pat Anderson, who used to be married to Kitty's brother Brian, also testified about an incident that happened just 10 days before the murders. Erik, Kitty, and Jose were at an out-of-town tennis tournament for Erik, and Pat and Brian decided to join them and go support their nephew. So they were all watching Erik play tennis, and Jose had been yelling at Erik from the audience terribly. The officials literally had to come over and warn Jose about his behavior. They told him to just sit down, to stop yelling, and to let the coaches do their job. Jose did listen to them, he sat down for a second, but then he quickly got back up and continued yelling at Erik. He was just being so aggressive, so loud, and just ruining everything. Erik was so frustrated at this that he actually told Jose to shut up. Pat said that she saw the color drain from Erik's face as soon as he said that. It was as if he instantly regretted what he did and was terrified of the aftermath. Jose actually removed Erik from the court. Like, he dragged him out, left the bag there, left the tennis racket there. I mean, he just dragged him out in front of all of those people, and the rest of the family followed them shortly after. They all went back to the hotel room, with Pat and Brian going to their own room and getting ready for dinner because they were all going to meet later at the hotel's restaurant to have some dinner. At around 7:30 p.m., Pat knocked on Jose and Kitty's hotel room door and was like, "Hello, are we going to dinner?" And when the door opened, it was just Kitty there. Jose wasn't in the room. Kitty explained to them that Jose was in Erik's hotel room, which was just a couple doors down, and that they had to wait for Jose to be done and then they could all go to dinner. Pat and Brian returned to their room to wait, but more time passed and they went back to Kitty's room. And they were like, "Listen, if Jose's gonna take a long time, like, let's just go to dinner. He can meet us there later. Like, I'm really hungry." But Kitty assured them that Jose would only be a little bit longer and to wait for him. At around 8:30 p.m., Jose finally left Erik's room, and Jose informed the rest of the group that Erik wouldn't be joining them for dinner. But Pat really wanted to go see Erik and say congratulations on the game, even though he lost. She wanted to comfort him, and Jose kind of laughed at her for saying this, but was like, "Okay, fine." They all went to Erik's room. Jose used a key to open it up, and inside, Erik was on the bed, and Pat could just tell that he looked really sad and that he didn't really want to speak to anyone. She wanted to just give him a hug and comfort him, but she was told that that wasn't a good idea. mafia. Then they all headed to dinner, excluding Erik, and Pat said that Kitty was so spaced out at dinner, she didn't even speak when spoken to. I mean, it was as if she had just disassociated. Now, from Erik's perspective, he said that in that incident, his dad came into the room and punished him by forcing him to give him knees, which was Erik's term for oral. Now, Brian Anderson, Pat's husband, he was actually one of the only family members who testified for the prosecution, and he told his version of this incident but painted Erik in a horrible light, kind of painting him to be like a brat. He said that there was no way the boys were being abused, but Erik's lawyer Leslie kind of went in on him, proving that he had little knowledge and memory of the brothers. I mean, he couldn't even remember Erik's age and certain memories he was referencing. Okay, wow, that was a lot to go through. I mean, the defense just had so much information to share because they wanted the jury to understand, like, yes, Lyle and Erik killed their parents, and that's not a good thing. Like, they're not saying that they're innocent. I mean, there's no denying it, but they did it because of all of this abuse and because they truly feared for their lives. As to what the prosecution had to say about this abuse, Pam Bozanik, the prosecutor, said, quote, "Men could not be raped because they lacked the necessary equipment to be raped." Yeah, actually crazy and like such a disgusting thing for a prosecutor to say. I don't know how she still had her job after that. I mean, I don't know how she could sit there and listen to Erik and Lyle's testimony, listen to them cry, pour their heart out, and be vulnerable, and then just say something like that. Now, unfortunately, it turns out that some jury members agreed because after a few weeks of deliberations in January of 1994, neither of the two juries were able to come to a unanimous decision, so there was a mistrial. Erik's jury was split, with all the women voting manslaughter and the men voting for first-degree murder. One of the jurors actually had her diary published from her time on the trial, and in her diary, it said that Erik's male jury members just like didn't believe that the boys were abused because they know how men can lie. They also said that Jose had mistresses, so it wasn't possible for him to have a mistress, a wife, and also abuse the boys at the same time, which is just like ridiculous to say. One male juror actually said that he wished he had a father like Jose who attended all of his sporting events. Yeah, as if that makes you a good dad. I mean, the men on the jury just like didn't believe boys could be molested by their fathers and said that the female jurors were just being too emotionally biased. So to all the people who say, why didn't they just go to the police in the first place? I mean, I feel like this is kind of an example as to why they didn't. You know, they might have not been believed. So after the mistrial, it was revealed that the brothers were going to be tried again, but this time with just one jury. So in between the two trials, the media frenzy just like didn't calm down. A woman named Norma Novelli, who Lyle had been talking to regularly on the phone, recorded their conversations and sold them without his permission or without his knowledge. She titled the series, quote, "The Private Diary of Lyle Menendez," in his own words. Lyle actually didn't say anything incriminating on these recordings, and the prosecution didn't even try to use them as evidence in the new trial, but it was just like a huge betrayal from someone that Lyle thought he was friends with. Then there was this other woman named Martha Shelton who came out publicly in an article saying that she had spoken to Lyle many times on the phone and had recorded these conversations, and that after the first trial, Lyle had told her, quote, "We snowed half the country, now we have to snow the other half." But guess what? Lyle never said that, and Martha admitted that she was just lying. She eventually came out and said she only said it because Dominic Dune, the writer of Nightmare on Elm Drive, paid her to say it. Now, Dominic admitted to paying Martha for her interview, but said he didn't pay her to lie. I mean, it's just all so weird. The brothers were also being mocked in the media. There was an SNL skit done on them. You know, people were making fun of them for their abuse. They didn't believe them because they were boys. I mean, it was just horrible to look back on and just horrible to see these skits and just seeing everyone make fun of them. Like, these were two men being vulnerable and admitting to something so terrible and so disturbing, and people were laughing at them. So the second trial began on August 21st, 1995, but this time the judge was not going to allow any evidence that involved abuse, and on top of that, the judge only allowed the jury to vote manslaughter charges for Jose and not for Kitty. The judge also blocked all expert psychologists from testifying, so no experts could analyze a confession tape. I mean, to a lot of people, it was pretty clear that the judge was like trying to shape the verdict. I mean, why else exclude all of the abuse? So let's get into it. For the second trial, Lyle didn't take the stand. It's speculated that he had already had a hard time talking about the abuse in the first trial and he just couldn't get through it again while also being dragged through the media. In the second trial, there were also no cameras allowed and Dr. Oziel wasn't called to testify. Prosecution told the narrative that Jose wasn't a violent person or the type to sexually abuse children, and that's a lie. There's a lot of evidence of both, as we know from the first trial. In the closing arguments, the prosecution said, "You heard no evidence of abuse." Well, yeah, it wasn't allowed to be heard. That's just so dumb. In the end, the jury came back with a decision of guilty for first-degree murder, but they voted no on the death penalty because the brothers didn't have a history of violence. This was really shocking to Erik and Lyle's lawyers because they thought that there was no case of first degree and that the worst that they would get would be second degree, but that's not what happened. Erik and Lyle were then sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole, and then they went to separate prisons so they wouldn't even be together. My heart just breaks for Erik and Lyle. I mean, not only because of the abuse, but because they weren't believed, simply because they were men. There is such a stigma around male sexual assault, and this case really shows that. In 1998, they filed an appeal, but it was denied. They tried again a year later, but were denied again. They were also denied in 2003 and then in 2005. They were finally reunited in the same prison in 2018, but it seemed like their conviction was just going to stick, so they decided to, make a life for themselves in prison. They have both gotten married since then, and earlier this year, Lyle graduated from UC Irvine. Lyle and Erik are also spearheading a green space project based on a Norwegian model to reduce recidivism by helping incarcerated people learn skills to re-enter the community. So all of this happened, all of these years went by since the murders and since the trial and everything. And then in 2023, two new key pieces of evidence were discovered. The first coming from Roy Rosello, a member of the boy band Menudo, which I mentioned earlier was signed to the label Jose Menendez was an executive at. Roy was a Menudo member from 1983 to 1986, and unfortunately, he says that when he was 13 years old, he was by Jose. So Roy was brought to New York City from Puerto Rico by Menudo's manager, Edgardo Diaz. Edgardo is not a good guy either, and we'll get into him in a second, but the night before Menudo's contract was signed to RCA, Roy was taken to Jose's house. Edgardo told him that he had to go inside and do a favor for Menudo and for him. Roy went into Jose's house, he had dinner with him, and during dinner, Jose gave him a glass of wine and told him to drink all of it because it was very expensive wine. Again, he's 13 years old. After finishing the wine, Roy started to feel tired and heavy. Unfortunately, he was then taken to a room where Jose R-worded him. The day after, the Menudo RCA contract was signed. Roy says that after this, Jose two more times, once before a concert and once after. Not only did Jose abuse Roy, but so did Menudo's manager Edgardo. It's just truly disturbing to hear this. I mean, there's actually a documentary that came out about this on Peacock if you guys want to hear more. It's just terrible that this happened to Roy and just deeply disturbing. It also gave the brothers more credibility. I mean, it wasn't just them saying that their dad was abusive. Now, there was a third person in the mix who wasn't even related to the boys at all. I mean, this was huge. The second piece of new evidence came from cousin Andy's mom, Marta. Again, Marta was Jose's sister. Now, unfortunately, Andy tragically passed away in 2003 due to an accidental overdose from sleeping pills. So years later, when his mom was going through his belongings, she found a letter that Erik had written to Andy in 1988, a year before the murders detailing the abuse. It reads, quote, "I've been trying to avoid Dad. It's still happening, Andy, but it's worse for me now. I never know when it's going to happen, and it's driving me crazy. Every night I stay up thinking he might come in. He's warned me 100 times, especially telling anyone, especially Lyle." So because of this, Erik and Lyle have filed a new habeas corpus petition saying that their convictions should be vacated. Currently, the Los Angeles County District Attorney, George Gascons, said that his office will be reviewing new evidence and that they will make the decisions on whether it warrants a resentencing. A hearing is scheduled for November 29th of this year, and this is just really amazing news, and I just hope that the justice system makes the right decision. Now, let's finally talk about Monsters on Netflix. After learning everything about the case, I mean, I completely understand why Erik would be upset with the show. Yes, Ryan Murphy and the actors have explained that the series shows different perspectives on the case, but the media got to run the perspective for like 34 years, and there's never been a show that's actually from the brothers' perspective. I feel like Monsters should have been from their perspective. They should have gotten Erik and Lyle to help them write the show, or just kind of focused more on how so many people in Erik and Lyle's lives were monsters and that they weren't at all. But I feel like in the show, it's kind of like an open-ended question of like, well, who do you think the monsters are? Do you think it's Kitty? Do you think it's Jose? Do you think it's Erik? Do you think it's Lyle? Like, I know Ryan Murphy said that him and his team did a lot of research into this case, but again, I just wish that they had talked to trauma experts about this or just gotten Erik and Lyle's, perspective. Now, while a lot of people are against Monsters, some people do feel that Monsters was helpful in getting this new hearing for the brothers, because after the show came out, District Attorney George Gascon said that his office did start receiving a lot of phone calls asking for their release. So, to some people, it feels like it kind of brought more attention to it, but still, if you guys do want to hear a documentary that's directly from Erik and Lyle's perspective, Netflix just released a documentary on the brothers called The Menendez Brothers. You guys can hear directly from Erik and Lyle. I mean, it's just a more fresh and accurate perspective on the case, so I definitely recommend that you guys check it out. I did see that the actor who plays, was it Erik on the show? Yeah, I think it was the actor that plays Erik on the show, and Kim Kardashian went to go visit the brothers in prison, like I think a few weeks ago, to talk about the situation more and to also talk about the show. Kim has also now publicly spoken out about the brothers and about how they should be free. Erik and Lyle really appreciate all the support that they've received and are happy that people finally believe them. They know that what they did was bad, that it was a serious crime, that it shouldn't be diminished, but that there's a reason as to why they did it. As of now, all we can do is wait and see what happens on November 29th. I will keep you guys posted on any new movements in the case. Thank you all so much for sitting here with me for this long and watching the video. I know it was a long one, but I would definitely love to know what you guys think about this down below. If you or someone you know is being abused, please contact the number on the screen or check out the resources linked down below. I think that's pretty much all I have to say. Please don't forget to subscribe if you guys are new to this channel, and don't forget to check out my second new channel, which has mystery movies and mystery thriller stories. That will also be linked down below, and yeah, I will see you all in the next video. Bye, familia!